David, how far back do we have to go to begin to think about the agenda, the globalist agenda, the plan to just control all of us?
Well, it's at least thousands of years, and probably a lot more than that, because if someone says to me, how deep does the rabbit hole go? Well, I don't know. I'm just going down it, and I've got to a certain point, but the end is nowhere in sight, because, I talk about the way we are manipulated on a 5 sense level through this network of interbreeding bloodlines and their secret society network. I've talked about how that network of bloodlines is ultimately controlled by interdimensional non-human entities, but you go beyond them. Who controls them? It's like the rabbit hole. You just keep going, and eventually it will be a form of consciousness that is holding this whole thing together. But in terms of where I've got so far, you can go back to a time when there was a global society of great advancement. Of course, native accounts and myths and stories describe this no matter what culture you go into. And then there was this enormous cataclysm of geological events which brought an end to that, what they called Golden Age, and that global society was split up into isolated groups. Now, these isolated groups originally had that knowledge of reality and the vibrational state of reality, and how you can manipulate it, how you can use it, how you can read it. And so when you go around the world, you find in some parts of the world they still continue with the rune stones, throwing the rune stones with the symbols on, which are energetic symbols which can be read by people that know what they're talking about to read energy fields. In another part of the world, in fact, all over the world now, you've got tarot cards, which have come through the ages. That's another way of another expression of this original knowledge of how to read energy. And in Africa, they throw the bones. I've had this done for me by a Zulu shaman called Credo Mutwa, and these bones are carved into certain symbols, and they throw the bones, and again, just like they throw the rune stones with symbols on them. It's all the same knowledge, but it's taken a different route, and all over the world. So when this global society broke down, the world became isolated, and that's basically where official history picks it up, in places like Sumer, in what is now Iraq, which they call the cradle of civilization, and other parts of the world. But this was not the start of civilization. It was what we call it. It was the restarting after recovering from these great cataclysmic events. Now, alongside this, in all the ancient cultures, you find this recurring theme, George, of an interbreeding between humans and a non-human race, creating hybrid bloodlines. And these hybrid bloodlines were the demigods. They were the middle people between the gods, as they were perceived.
Yes.
Non-human entities, which we would call extraterrestrials. I prefer to call them interdimensionals, and humans. And it was these bloodlines that became the royal bloodlines of the ancient world, all over the world, where they claimed the right to rule, which became eventually the so-called divine right to rule, which was just another expression of this original I have the right to rule because I have the genetics of the gods. And these bloodlines have been expanding their power and influence and control through the centuries.
Through the entire planet, David, right?
Because what they've done now, what's happening now, George, is they've expanded into another global society. We are now in the first global society since the original one, vast eons ago. And what has happened is that there are certain parts of the world, in the ancient world, where these bloodlines really centered themselves, and one of them was ancient Sumer. in what is now Iraq, and then later in the same land between two rivers, Mesopotamia, the Tigris and the Euphrates, in what became known as Babylon and the Babylonian Empire. So I would say, just as a quick aside here, George, that absolutely it is no accident about the invasion of Iraq at this time. Yes, on one level, it might be about oil, and that's a benefit and the control of oil and all that stuff. But that's only one level. Another level, much more important to these people, is this has enormous historic significance to them, this land, because it's ancient Sumer and it's ancient Babylon, where these bloodlines overwhelmingly came out of. They then relocated, I detail all this in the book because it's a chronological story. They then relocated eventually in Rome, where they were behind the Roman Empire, and the Roman Empire then expanded into Northern Europe, and there was interbreeding again between these hybrid bloodlines with the aristocracy of Northern Europe, and then eventually the aristocracy and royal families of Northern Europe were these bloodlines. They were interbred into these hybrid bloodlines. And then through the great European empires, particularly the British Empire, but the French and others too, these bloodlines basically took the world over in terms of their colonization of the world. But there's two forms of control. One is a control you can see, like fascism or communism,
yes.
Apartheid, a dictatorship you can see. And that has a finite life, because at least the people under that dictatorship know they're under a dictatorship. They know they're in a state of control. The greatest form of dictatorship is a prison cell where you can't see the bars, where you are told you are free, and you think you are free up to a point, because people who think they're free don't rebel about the fact that they're not.
Until you bounce into that imaginary bar, you realize you can't go much farther than where you were.
Exactly. It's like you're free as long as you don't want to go past this point, and then you realize you're not. And what happened with so-called, giving freedom to the former colonies, like the United States, was that as apparently on the surface these European powers withdrew. And when I'm talking about the European powers, the countries, it's not the prime ministers or the leaders that are in control. It's the secret society network controlled by what I call the shadow people that people never see. They're the ones that control the people who are apparently in power. I mean, your prime minister comes for 5 years or 10 years, president comes for 4 years or 8 years, and then they're gone and someone else comes in.
The ones we think we elect, they're not really in power.
Elect, which of course with George Bush we clearly have not. But the thing is that these people come and go, but they're just front people. The real power is always in power. As someone brilliantly said, it doesn't matter who you vote for, the government still gets in. Well, the secret force behind governments gets in. So what happened was that when these colonial powers withdrew on the surface, they left out in these countries, including the United States, the bloodline network and the secret society network, which manipulates that bloodline network and its gophers and front people into positions of power and authority. And it has gone on controlling those countries ever since. And the United States has been set up as a fall guy. It's been set up to take the rap for advancing the agenda of global control. Because although the bullets are fired out of America, symbolically, the gun is loaded in the center of the secret society network in Europe, in places like Rome and London, and these key centers of this secret society network, because the Church of Rome is actually the Church of Babylon relocated. Because when the bloodlines relocated eventually from Babylon to Rome, they took with them the religion of Babylon. And if this is why, and there's been a lot of documentation of this now in recent years, this is why when you look at the holy days of the Roman Church, you look at the symbolism, you look at the basic stories, they are a mirror of what was said in Babylon thousands of years earlier, because it's Babylon relocated. And, it's controversial, but I've known to be, but the Roman Church is not about love and God and all this stuff. It's actually a major center of this whole spider's web of secret societies that are manipulating behind the scenes, and it's like an iceberg. The real stuff's going on under the surface, and what we see are the George Bushes and the Tony Blairs and the Gordon Browns and all this stuff.
Sure.
But they're just the people we see that are playing it out in the public arena. The real power is underneath, and that's what we need to uncover.
What do they want, David? What do they want with us?
Well, there's multi-levels to this, George, and I go into all of them that I can in the book, which is why it's so comprehensive. And it depends what level you want.
So it's different facets they want from us.
If you want to look at the 5 sense level of it, these people, these hybrid bloodlines, which I think the Bible refers to as the Nephilim. That's one name, but they have different names in different cultures. Mm-hmm. In South Africa, they're known as the Chitahuri, the children of the serpent or the children of the python. And at the 5 sense level, these people have, if you like, their body computers. They do not have empathy. They do not have the ability to empathize with the consequences for others of their actions. This is why they can slaughter vast numbers of people. And to us, we have a fail-safe mechanism called empathy with the consequences for others of our actions.
We have a conscience.
Well, that's another way of putting it. Absolutely, George. Right. Yeah, that's another way of putting it. And these people do not. And this is why I've been saying all these years, don't judge what these people would do by what you would do, because it's not the same process of perception that you have. And so you have a situation where, like, 3,000 people on 9/11, well, and so what? Whereas everyone else is horrified, to them it's nothing. And this means that all bets are off. There are no limits. There are no emotional, if you like, or empathetic limits that they have. And as a result, they are operating to an agenda with a motivation and with an attitude that the rest of the population couldn't really comprehend.
And David, I grew up during the Cold War in the 60s, 10, 11, 12 years old, truly not really understanding what was going on, other than knowing that there was a form of fear that I could sense from my parents. When they would let us do this fallout shelter routine in schools, and we had to huddle down and, put our head between our legs. And I knew there was something going on here. Jump ahead to today. I have never seen this planet discuss the possibilities of nuclear war than ever before, beyond the 60s. Because here Putin is saying, we're going to get ready because no one's going to muscle us. We're talking about the possibility of an armed Iran, or what could happen there. Pakistan now. I have never seen them let us know that there's going to be some kind of nuclear holocaust. It's almost as if they've written it out, they're going to do it, and they want to say, we told you so.
Well, you're absolutely right. One of the other key things that people that haven't looked at this need to appreciate is forget borders, okay? Forget borders. They're for public consumption. These bloodlines operate in Russia. They operate in China massively. The ancient Chinese emperors used to claim the right to be emperor because of their genetic connection to the serpent gods. And these non-human entities that did this interbreeding and continue to do it, I would say, overwhelmingly are described, not always and only, but overwhelmingly described in reptilian terms, which has fundamental implications for their attitude, because if you look at the reptilian brain, the R complex that scientists call it, which is the oldest part of the human brain, comes from our reptilian genetics, the character traits of the reptilian brain in the human brain are exactly the character traits of these Illuminati elite hybrid bloodlines.
They have no heart, do they?
No empathy, cold-blooded behavior, no empathy with the victims of their actions, an obsession with might is right, an obsession with acquisition of wealth, of control.
And more. They need more and more, don't they? They feed off it.
Going back to an earlier question, George, they don't know what enough is. It doesn't exist in their reality. And this comes around to something very, very important, I think. I read an article, funny enough, in the LA Times years ago by an anthropologist who was talking about the cult of excess, as he called it, in California. I think dinner plates in restaurants had just gone to a bigger size or something. I think that was the point of the article. And he was saying this acquisition of more and more, vastly beyond enough, he said was a trait of the reptilian brain, in the human brain, the R complex, because he said the reptilian brain associates having far, far more than enough with a greater chance of survival, because the reptilian brain is all about survival. You know where we have this reaction to danger? It's called fight or flight. We hit the guy or run. That comes from the reptilian brain. Now, the reptilian brain is a very good part within the whole, because it is our survival.
Sure, it's necessary. Yeah.
Now, imagine if you have far greater reptilian genetics than the rest of the population, you are going to exhibit much more extreme expressions of the reptilian brain characteristics and reptilian genetic characteristics than the rest of the population. It's exactly what these two people do. And one of the things they are utterly obsessed with is survival. Everything is about survival, survival, survival. And so they want, on one level, there are many more levels to this, but it is overwhelmingly about survival. These people, George, that are manipulating us are terrified themselves, and much of what they do comes from being having this obsession with surviving. Now, if survival is the area that they operate on, and that's the reptilian genetics, the more you can manipulate the human population into a mental state of obsession with survival, fear of not surviving, you are locking them in to that level of perception that connects into the level of perception that you're in. In other words, you have the potential of creating a hive mind. And you're quite right when you mentioned a few minutes ago, George, about all these reasons to be frightened, a nuclear war and this and Iran and all this stuff. We are being given so many reasons daily on a global scale now to be frightened of not surviving. And what that does is lock us into this reptilian genetics, which is all about survival. And, what we need to, and again, going back to body consciousness or infinite consciousness, body consciousness is obsessed with surviving because it has because it has a sense of finiteness. Oh, I die in 70 years and 10 or whatever.
Right.
Whereas when you come from the perspective of being infinite consciousness and not Chuck Jones or Ethel Smith, you don't even consider survival as a situation or a problem, because you know that infinite consciousness cannot do anything but survive. It's a different point of observation. So once you become conscious and you start to self-identify with being infinite consciousness, eternal consciousness, rather than a finite body, then you move out of this realm of survival mentality, which is what these people want to lock us into. And that's another reason why it's important to become conscious, because we move out of their realm of operation.
Stay with us. David Icke. Lots more to talk about. David's website's linked up at coasttocoastam.com. Absolutely frightening and very, very riveting.